The loudest voice doesn't always lead. It's the calm, focused presence in the room, the one who says little but moves with intent, that ends up in control. In a world that never stops talking, there's something powerful about the person who knows when to stay quiet. They're not avoiding the spotlight. They're sharpening their edge. They're watching, calculating, holding their fire until it actually counts. That's not weakness. That's real strength. And in today's world, that kind of control is rare. We've been trained to think we need to speak up, prove ourselves, show everything we're working on. But the truth is, the more you explain, the more you lose your edge. The more noise you make, the easier it is to miss the bigger picture. There's a reason the Stoics trained themselves to stay composed, to hold their thoughts, to act when the time was right, not just to feel wise, but to win where others fell apart. And that's what we're diving into today, the strategy of silence. Not silence as avoidance, but silence as strength, as power, as the ultimate move in a noisy world that's obsessed with attention. If that sounds like something you need right now, stick around, because what you'll take from this isn't just motivation, it's a new way of showing up in the world. And if you're someone who appreciates content that cuts through the fluff and helps you build real strength from the inside out, do me one simple free favor. Tap that subscribe button. It lets me know this message is reaching the people who actually need it. Let's get into it. Have you noticed that the strongest presence in a room is rarely the loudest voice? It's the one who doesn't interrupt, who listens, weighs, waits, and then when they speak, everyone leans in. It's not magic. It's not even mystery. It's mastery. Mastery of emotion. Mastery of impulse, mastery of energy. In a time when so many are desperate to be heard, the one who chooses not to speak too soon becomes magnetic. They draw attention not by reaching for it, but by deserving it, because silence signals control, not just over the room, but over the self. And that kind of control is rare. It tells people, this person doesn't need to dominate the space, because they already dominate themselves. Socrates once said, "The beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms." But you can't define anything clearly, especially yourself, if your thoughts are constantly spilling out before they're even fully formed. A person who restrains their words isn't hiding, they're thinking, sharpening. Most people confuse noise for value. They believe if they talk more, they'll be perceived as smarter, stronger, more important. But noise rarely builds anything. It only fills the space where intention could have lived. Power doesn't come from how much you say. It comes from the strength of what you choose not to say. When you stop reacting out of ego, stop explaining out of fear, stop justifying just to be accepted, you stop bleeding your energy. And what happens in that silence? You create space, not just around you, but within you. And that space becomes a forge, a place where your thoughts get refined, your presence grows sharper, and your movements carry more weight. Carl Jung put it simply, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Silence is the door to that awakening. It's where you start separating your real self from the performative version that's always trying to be liked, noticed, or validated. We leak so much of our strength through unnecessary speech. Every time you speak just to fill silence, just to be included, just to feel important, you're spending energy that could have been invested in action. Worse, you sometimes give away your plans before they've taken shape. You inflate them with attention before they've even had time to breathe. And then, when the time comes to act, the motivation is already gone. Plato said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." It's a sharp line, but there's truth in it. When you operate from a place of internal security, you don't feel the need to explain every move or narrate every goal. You let your results do the talking. You let your progress, slow, focused, undeniable, build the story for you. There's something deeply empowering about moving in silence. You stop chasing applause and start chasing depth. You learn to sit with your ideas before turning them into announcements. You wait for your instincts to confirm what your ego might have already tried to declare. And when you finally act, it's not about proving anything. It's just who you are now. No fanfare, no big speech, just action. Clean, strong, deliberate. And here's what's beautiful. When people finally notice, you don't need to say, "I told you so." You don't even need to look back. You've already moved on to the next thing. That's how powerful silence becomes when you master it. It gives you momentum that isn't dependent on anyone's reaction. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But that kind of knowing doesn't happen in noise. It happens in stillness, in reflection, in moments where you don't feel the need to defend or declare anything. Because when you're not busy performing, you start listening. And when you start listening, you start learning about others, about your environment, and most importantly, about yourself. That's when you stop being reactive. You become strategic. You stop saying, "Here's what I'm going to do," and start asking, "What actually needs to be done?" And you do it, quietly, fully, without wasting words. When you talk about a goal, your brain gives you a hit of satisfaction, as if you've already done the thing. The applause comes early, the reward feels real, and because you've already tasted the praise, the hunger to actually follow through starts to fade. That fire, that edge, it dims, not because you can't do it, but because you already felt like you did. And that's a trap more people fall into than they realize. Good intentions, loud announcements, but very little to show for it later. So instead of announcing your next move, build it in silence. Let your effort speak before your voice ever does. When you talk, make it count. Speak only when it adds something real, something strong, something necessary. Otherwise, keep your focus locked in and your mouth closed. That's silence. That's not weakness. That's your strategy. That's your advantage. Think of a master chess player. They don't rush. They don't get emotional. They don't try to show off. They study the board, read the room, calculate the patterns. They wait. And then, with one quiet, precise move, they flip the game. Not because they moved first, but because they moved right. That's what silence gives you. Space to think clearly, space to move wisely. This kind of discipline isn't passive. It's actually the most active mindset you can carry. It takes strength to hold your ideas close, to work without clapping for yourself, to build quietly while the world watches someone else. Silence isn't sitting back. It's being deeply involved, but with a kind of energy that doesn't leak. It's like aiming before firing instead of shooting wildly and hoping something lands. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." You can't build anything meaningful if your energy is always pointed outward, toward other people's opinions, toward empty praise, toward the need to be seen. Silence is the turn inward. It's where you stop reacting and start creating, where you stop proving and start building. When you don't feel the need to broadcast every thought or declare every intention, you take back control. Your focus becomes sharper. Your decisions become more intentional. You move with purpose instead of impulse. And when the results finally arrive, they're undeniable, because they weren't just talked about, they were earned. Plato believed that the measure of a man is what he does with power, and true power begins with self-control, not just over what you do, but over what you say, over what you reveal, over how much of yourself you give away before the work is done. Every time you speak, you give people a piece of your inner world. So why not wait until it's something worth handing over? This isn't about secrecy or paranoia. It's about energy, focus, direction. The quiet builder will always outlast the noisy dreamer, because while one's talking, the other's stacking bricks. While one's gathering likes, the other's gathering leverage. Silence keeps your goals clean, your vision tight, your mind free of the clutter that comes with over-explaining or oversharing. You protect the seed while it's growing. And when it blooms, when the thing you built starts to show, it doesn't need an introduction. People feel the weight of it. They know something serious has happened, and they'll look back and realize you never even said a word. That's what makes silence powerful. It's the discipline to move without noise, to aim without warning, to build without applause, and to win without needing to shout about it. Because real power never begs to be noticed. It just arrives and changes everything. The greatest innovators, leaders, athletes, and creators all share something that isn't always obvious at first glance. They weren't built in the spotlight. They weren't shaped by applause or likes or headlines. They were forged in silence, in the quiet hours, behind the scenes. While the world watched someone else, they were building, practicing, refining, not waiting for permission, just preparing for the moment their opportunity would come. And when it did, they didn't flinch. They didn't panic. They didn't need to catch up. They had already done the work, long before anyone was paying attention. But here's the thing most people miss. The real noise doesn't always come from the outside. It's not just the opinions, the distractions, or the competition. It's that voice inside your own head, the one that never seems to stop, the inner critic that questions every step, the doubter that whispers, "What if you fail?" The overthinker that finds 1,000 reasons to wait, to delay, to hold back. That's the voice that derails more potential than any outside obstacle ever could. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's the danger of inner noise. It feels like truth. It dresses up as logic, as caution, as being smart. But really it's fear in disguise. It's the part of you that's afraid of what happens if you actually step into your full power. Because that version of you, the focused, disciplined, unstoppable version, it doesn't need the constant commentary. It doesn't need approval. It just moves. Silence isn't just about holding your tongue in public. It's about learning to stop debating with yourself in private. It's refusing to be pulled into every mental spiral that starts with, "What if?" Because when your mind is crowded with that kind of noise, your vision gets cloudy. You miss the signs. You miss the moments that were meant for you. The mind becomes so busy trying to keep up with imagined problems that it can't see the real solutions that are right there. Quiet, subtle, waiting. When you start to silence that inner chaos, something powerful happens. You start hearing what was buried underneath, that intuitive voice, that gut instinct, the part of you that knows what needs to be done and when. You notice patterns, little things others ignore. You catch opportunities that seem invisible to the noisy mind. You see connections between things that on the surface don't look related, but deep down they are. Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." And that's exactly what silence helps you do. It clears the path to self-awareness. It strips away the distractions long enough for you to actually hear yourself. Not the version shaped by anxiety or pressure, but the one that exists beneath all of that. The version that's calm, focused, clear. You start to realize that discipline isn't just about external action. It's also about internal alignment, about knowing when to challenge a thought and when to let it pass, about knowing when your mind is helping you And when it's holding you hostage, the strength to sit in silence and not reach for a screen or a distraction or a quick fix, that's real mental toughness. Because that silence is where growth begins. It's where clarity happens. It's where strategy gets refined. Socrates believed that an unexamined life is not worth living. But you can't examine anything if you're always talking over yourself. You need space, stillness, a break in the noise so you can actually see. And the truth is, the deeper your silence, the stronger your insight. Because clarity isn't loud, wisdom doesn't shout, and the most important realizations in life rarely come wrapped in flashing lights. They arrive like whispers, and if your mind is too loud, you'll miss them. Here's a question. When was the last time you truly sat with yourself in silence? No music, no scrolling, no distractions, just you, your thoughts, and the uncomfortable clarity that shows up when you stop running. It's not easy. Most people can't sit still because when the noise dies down, their insecurities surface. But that discomfort, that's your edge. If you can face it without flinching, you've just built a kind of strength that no external noise can touch. It's not about becoming cold or detached. It's about developing the kind of composure that doesn't crumble under pressure. Being unmoved doesn't mean you don't feel. It means your feelings don't own you. That pause between stimulus and response, that's where your power lives. React less, respond better. Because reaction is impulsive, response is intentional. And that's the space where real influence begins. Not from force, but from calm control. Leadership, in its truest form, isn't about volume. It's not about having the last word or speaking the most often. It's about presence. It's about the energy you bring into a room before you even say a word. The silent leader doesn't demand attention. They command it. Not through noise, but through clarity, through stability, through stillness. People feel it. They lean in. Not because you raised your voice, but because when you do speak, it's clear that you've thought before talking. That kind of influence can't be faked. It's built in silence, in restraint, in watching, in reading the room, in understanding the temperature before jumping into the fire. Aristotle said, "He who cannot be a good follower cannot be a good leader." And to follow well, you must first listen well. The quiet leader listens not just to reply, but to understand, to notice what others miss, to fill the gaps no one else sees because they were too busy trying to be heard. And that's the essence of using silence as strategy, not just as a personal discipline, but as a powerful tool in the real world. Think about walking into a negotiation. The room has tension, agendas, egos. Everyone's waiting to prove something. But you wait, you listen, you let the silence work for you. People start filling it, revealing more than they intended. And then, when the time is right, you speak. Not a lot, just enough. But every word lands with impact. That's precision over volume. That's how you flip the game without raising your voice. And it doesn't just apply in business or meetings. It applies to your personal goals, your projects, your growth. How much time gets wasted chasing everything that looks like progress but adds nothing to your path? The scrolling, the comparing, the overcommitting. It's movement, sure, but not momentum. Not all effort is effective. Not all action is aligned. Plato once said, "The excessive increase of anything often causes a reaction in the opposite direction." And he was right. Too much scattered energy eventually creates burnout, confusion, and regret. That's why silence matters. It forces you to choose, to prioritize, to subtract. Instead of trying to be everywhere and do everything, the silent strategist moves with intention. They say no more often. They go deep instead of wide. And that depth, that focused, quiet depth, That's what produces the kind of results that can't be ignored, even if no one saw the work being done. So much of winning in life isn't about speed. It's about direction. And you only find direction when you stop long enough to ask yourself, what actually matters right now? Not what's trending, not what everyone else is chasing, just what's true for you, what moves your mission forward, what aligns with who you are becoming. Silence clears the fog. It reminds you that you don't have to respond to every stimulus, jump at every opportunity, or explain yourself every time someone doesn't understand. You just keep building, quietly, relentlessly, with your eyes open and your energy intact. Silence teaches you something that noise never will, the value of subtraction. In a world that constantly pushes more, silence pulls you back toward less but better. It sharpens your attention. It shows you where you're leaking energy. Because every time you say yes to something meaningless, something shallow or out of alignment, you are by default saying no to something that does matter, something real, something that could have changed your life if only you had saved your time, your focus, your energy. And that's why focus is so rare. Not because people don't want it, but because they're too distracted to realize what they're giving up. In a culture overloaded with options, the person who can strip things down to what truly counts has the edge. That edge doesn't come from knowing everything, it comes from knowing what to ignore. But subtraction doesn't only matter when you're feeling strong, it matters even more when doubt creeps in. When you're in that foggy place, unsure of your next step, when clarity feels just out of reach. Those are the moments that reveal who's trained themselves to sit still and who scrambles for a quick fix. Because silence, in those moments, isn't a void. It's a mirror. It reflects back the version of you that's been buried under distraction. It strips away the filters. No applause, no opinions. Just you, looking at the truth of who you are and who you're not. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But silence doesn't let you run. It holds you in place until you come clean with yourself. And that's not weakness. That's the starting point of real strength. Because clarity doesn't come from more input. It comes from slowing down, from cutting the noise, from finally hearing your own voice without distortion. And here's something most people miss. Even in movement, silence plays a role. Not everything loud is productive. Not every action needs to be broadcasted. You can be in motion and still be rooted in quiet. In fact, the most effective action often grows out of stillness. That's where strategy lives. That's where timing sharpens. That's where your moves become deliberate instead of reactive. Plato said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And one of the greatest forms of power is the ability to pause, to act with precision, not just to move, but to know why you're moving and toward what. You don't build a life that matters by sprinting after everything that glitters. You build it by knowing what to chase and having the discipline to stay locked in when the world is trying to pull you in 10 different directions. That's the beauty of silence. It slows the world down just enough for you to get honest. And in that honesty, you find alignment. And in that alignment, your actions finally start to mean something. They're not just habits, they're not just reactions, they become decisions you stand behind. Movements that reflect who you've chosen to be, not who you've been pressured into becoming. Because greatness doesn't come from intensity alone. It's not about how loud or fast or aggressive you are. It comes from clarity, from knowing where you're going and why. And clarity only shows up when you stop trying to outrun the noise and start listening beneath it. So even when you're taking action, even when you're building, pushing, creating, carry silence with you. Not as absence, but as awareness, as depth, as that steady internal compass that reminds you, You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be seen to make progress. You just need to be clear. Clear on what matters, clear on who you are, and clear on where you're going. Some people move just to say they're moving. They rush into action not because it's time, but because stillness feels uncomfortable. They confuse motion with progress, noise with meaning. But there's a different kind of power, the one that comes from strategic patience, waiting not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Sitting still, not because you're uncertain, but because you know the moment hasn't come yet. And when it finally does, you don't flinch, you don't stutter, you strike. That's a different level of discipline. To know how to act is one thing, but to know when, and to wait until that moment, without folding under pressure, that's real strength. Because when you act from a place of stillness, your movement is clean. There's no hesitation, no need to explain it to anyone. You're not looking for approval. You're not asking for permission. You're just ready. And when it's time to go, you go all in. No hedging, no second guessing, no extra commentary to soften the blow or gather applause. You just move with full force, full clarity, full conviction. That kind of action, rooted in silence, refined in discipline, it doesn't just make a dent, it leaves a mark, it lands, and more importantly, it lasts. That's the kind of impact most people miss, because they're too busy chasing attention. They want to be seen, heard, celebrated. But here's the truth. Fame is loud and temporary. It requires constant noise to stay alive. It feeds off attention, and when the spotlight moves on, so does the relevance. But legacy? That's different. Legacy doesn't beg to be seen. It builds while the world is distracted. It grows in the background during the early mornings and late nights when no one's watching. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And that awakening, the one that drives real, meaningful work, it rarely happens under bright lights. It happens in silence, when you're alone with your thoughts, when you're building without praise, when you keep showing up day after day, even when there's no recognition. That's where legacy starts. Aristotle believed that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Legacy is built from those habits, from that consistency, from the moments that don't make headlines, but form the foundation of something unshakable, something you can be proud of, not because it got noticed, but because it meant something. And when you live like that, focused, patient, grounded, you stop worrying about being remembered. You start focusing on being real, being useful, being true. That's the kind of work that survives trends, outlives hype, and speaks long after you're gone. Because it was never about being known. It was about making something worth knowing. Because the most powerful people aren't remembered for how loudly they spoke. They're remembered for the impact of what they built in silence. Their influence wasn't made through noise. It was carved into the world through consistent, disciplined work that didn't ask for attention but earned respect. They didn't perform for the crowd. They prepared for the moment. And when it came, they didn't need to announce themselves. The world noticed anyway. So maybe it's time to flip the script. What would your life look like if you stopped explaining and started executing? If you didn't need to share every plan, every goal, every move, because you were too busy making them happen? What if you spent less time reacting and more time watching, not watching out of fear or hesitation, but with the steady eye of someone gathering data, patterns, insight? Because sometimes the best move isn't the loud one, it's the informed one, the move that's made at the right time, with the right knowledge and the right intention behind it. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." And there's something freeing about realizing you don't have to say much. Not because you don't have something to say, but because your focus is somewhere more valuable. On the work, on the vision, on building something that doesn't need constant explanation to matter. And when you stop trying to prove, you make space to prepare. Quietly, patiently, powerfully, you start playing the long game. And that long game changes everything, because it's not driven by emotion or impulse or outside noise. It's built from clarity, and that kind of clarity comes from silence, not the kind that hides, but the kind that sharpens. Let your work do the talking. Let your decisions speak for you. Let your consistency become your legacy. You don't need a megaphone when your results carry weight. In fact, the louder you try to be, the less space you leave for others to actually feel your presence. When you move with intention, people feel it without needing an explanation. Carl Jung believed that a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. And silence is often where that inner fire is faced, not in the chaos of performance, but in the quiet of preparation. That's where character gets refined. That's where depth is built. And once you've walked through that process, once you've learned to be still in the storm, you become the person who doesn't flinch when the pressure's on. In a world full of noise, be the signal. The one who speaks less but says more. The one who doesn't posture but still commands the room. The one who doesn't need the last word because their actions already close the conversation. And always remember, the deepest waters make the least noise. The strongest people don't broadcast their strength. The loudest voice in the room might catch attention, but it rarely leads. It's the quiet one, the still one, the one who waits, who listens, who executes, that ends up shaping the future. Because silence, when it's disciplined, intentional, focused, isn't just a personality trait. It's a strategy, one that wins battles without ever needing to raise a voice, one that prepares in the shadows and rises when it matters most, one that builds things that last, long after the noise fades. That's the kind of power worth chasing, not the kind that needs to be seen to be real, but the kind that works quietly and transforms everything it touches. In the end, it's not about how loud your voice is, it's about how deep your impact runs. Let your silence shape you, let your actions speak for you, and when the time comes, let your results be undeniable. If this message stirred something in you, there's more waiting. Watch one of the videos on your screen now. It just might be exactly what you need next.